So my name's Ron Whitehurst. My wife and I run Rincon-Vitova Insectaries. I'm a pest control advisor, and I advise farmers on how to set up biological control programs to reduce their pesticide use, to get off the toxic pesticides by setting up programs for biological control. And let's see. Why don't you go down and introduce yourselves then? Yeah. So
You want me to start?
Margie, yeah, there you go.
Okay. I'm Pam Marone. I'm a serial entrepreneur. Started my first company in 1990, and another one in 95, and another one in 2006. All three were sold, dedicated to looking at microbes and extracts of plants to develop them as biological pesticides or plant biostimulants. And now I am a free agent, although I am starting up another company called the Invasive Species Corporation. And we are looking for, we're going to deploy biologicals for controlling invasive species in water and forestry. And prior to this sustainable work group, I was on the chlorpyrifos alternative work group. So it's good to see the transition from chemical intensive to more sustainable pest management. So I'm excited by what we've done over the last 2 years.
Hi, I'm Jenny Broom. I'm with Driscoll's, and I lead their global plant health program. I'm a plant pathologist by training. I have been at Driscoll's about 12 years, and before that I was at UC Davis, Associate Director of the Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program, which I've come to EcoFarm for many years to support sessions like this one. And really happy to be here. We're based locally as a company and hosted a learning session at our research farm here. We breed and grow strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries, and we are very highly committed to organic berries. They taste better, and they are reduced reliance on more toxic chemicals. So glad to be part of the panel today.
Hi, I'm Julie Henderson, the director of the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, and really excited to be here with my fellow work group members, and just want to start by thanking them so much for their incredible dedication over the last, as Ron said, almost 2 years working on this roadmap that, as Pam mentioned, really grew out of the chlorpyrifos alternatives work group. And so part of the reason I took this job about 1.5 years ago, first in acting capacity and then as director, was because of this work, because I am incredibly excited about and motivated to help the state move toward sustainable practices. And so really excited to be here today. Just really quickly, before I moved to DPR, as we call ourselves, I was a deputy secretary at Cal EPA and worked really closely with both DPR and the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment on pesticide issues. So it's been a really interesting, exciting transition, and happy to be here today.
And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Margaret Reeves. I'm a senior scientist at the Pesticide Action Network based in Berkeley. Been there for 26 years with a focus on agroecology and farm worker health and safety. And I too was on the chlorpyrifos alternatives work group. So was delighted to transition to the Sustainable Pest Management work group, and happy to have you all here today to talk about what we accomplished and what's coming next, because a lot of work is still ahead.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to make a couple of introductory remarks, and then Julie will give a presentation, and we'll go around the panel with some comments and such. To put this in context of EcoFarm, our EcoFarm community has focused both on putting forward a vision of producing food free from poisons and pushing back against the forces that make their living selling products that, when used according to the label directions, make people sick and harm the environment. So EcoFarm was founded 43 years ago by amigo Bob Pontesano, when he invited his farmer friends to come to the firehouse in winters to listen to pioneering insect ecologist Everett Dietrich, the founder of our Insectaries, talk about biological control by natural enemies, or BC by NE, and the harm from conventional chemical control, CCC. Amigo had spent a couple of previous seasons following Deke in fields, vineyards, and orchards. Here we have a picture of Amigo Bob in one of his characteristic roles of guiding assemblies and leading farm tours and that sort of thing. So we owe a lot of the character and depth of information about working with nature, to him and his legacy. Over the decades, Amigo helped many farmers stop using chemical inputs. He had a passion to organize the EcoFarm community to fight against conventional chemical control. At the 2019 conference, the last with Amigo, he held a Friday 3:30 session at Merrill Hall called "Let's Fight Together to End Agricultural Toxics." So we have one of the programs from that year, and so it was a lively meeting, and lots of people in conjunction with PAN, Pesticide Action North America, and CPR, Citizens for Pesticide Reform, did a postcard campaign, and we collected a huge number of postcards, and then those were delivered to DPR. And it was mainly fighting against chlorpyrifos. And at the time, Amigo was frail from having battled cancer for a couple of years. And Sam Earnshaw, a co-leader of EcoFarm from the beginning, stepped up to help organize a group that continued to correspond after the conference and delivered the postcards to DPR. And so if you're interested, we'll pass a notebook around, and you can leave your email, and we can stay in touch and see where we can continue organizing. So things do change. So chlorpyrifos was banned in California, and DPR set up a chlorpyrifos alternatives working group to look for replacements to that dangerous neurotoxin. Many called for a broad review of pesticide use versus the next less toxic pesticide in the chain there. In 1921, the Sustainable Pest Management work group was set up to look more broadly at how to reduce toxic pesticides from a system perspective. Today's EcoFarm session with the director of DPR, Julie Henderson, will discuss the roadmap. Next week, on the 26th, the roadmap will be released, so we can talk in generalities about it and our aspirations for the roadmap and its role in transforming California agriculture to focus on biology. So this will be an opportunity for farming and environmental groups to weigh in and say, yes, this is really great. These are some great ideas, some good direction, and we particularly want to emphasize, this particular aspect, that our group is interested in. So it's not a casual accident that this session is happening. EcoFarm will continue extending the knowledge that early adopters, young farmers, farmers of color, and pesticide organizers need to accelerate statewide transition to organic agriculture. So I appreciate everybody being here, and we'll have Julie Henderson give her remarks then, and then we'll continue with the roundtable.
Thanks, Ron. So again, just really happy to be here with all of you today, and also want to recognize John McCune, one of our fellow work group members here also, and Katie Marin, who was one of our valiant facilitators who got us through almost 2 years of work in developing the roadmap. Just to kind of by way of background, I don't know how much any of you know know about the department, but we are one of 6 boards and departments at the California Environmental Protection Agency. And as with our sister boards and departments, our mission is to protect public health and the environment. In our case, we're doing it in the context of pest management. And we do that by regulating pesticides, but also by really fostering reduced risk pest management. And I think I just want to acknowledge that a large part of that mission has been focused on the regulation of pesticides and probably not as much on the fostering of reduced risk pest management tools. And so part of what we want to do with this roadmap and in making this transition is really lifting up that element of our mission and really have much more of a visible focus on integrated pest management and sustainable pest management. I think you all know that though integrated pest management has been practiced for decades in California, it hasn't been adopted at a system-wide level. And so we see that as an opportunity to really much better protect public health and the environment in California. And so as both Pam and Ron and Margaret mentioned, a lot of this kind of work began when the department took action to cancel chlorpyrifos and its use in California. And I'll just mention that obviously was the result of decades of advocacy by many and a lot of research by a lot of scientists and work at the agency. So recognize though that was a tool that was in widespread use in California, and so put together the chlorpyrifos alternative work group to look at alternatives. And what we recognized as that group is that looking at a single chemical at a time is going to take us forever, and that we really needed to look at how we're managing pests at a system-wide level and really try to have a more holistic focus. At the same time, Governor Newsom, who was newly in office and who was very much a proponent of getting rid of chlorpyrifos, wanted us to look at how we could accelerate this transition. So one thing to talk about having a system-wide approach, but how do we make it happen faster? And so we convened along with the Department of Food and Agriculture and Cal EPA, the chlorpyrifos alternatives work group. And it's represented by many different interests that are impacted by pest management in California. So organic and conventional agriculture, NGOs like Margaret's, environmental justice advocates, growers in the field like Driscoll's, biologicals like Pam, as well as public health researchers and other government representatives. And together we were charting a course to more sustainable pest management and looked at what have been some of the roadblocks that have stood in the way. And so I think it's fair to say that we had very lively conversations, and part of the effort was bringing people from different perspectives together to be able to really come together on a common approach. And I'm sure you all know that's no simple task, but I think we all were really excited at the end of the day when in December we reached consensus on the roadmap and its recommendations, both in terms of goals and actions. And that roadmap will be released. We're tentatively looking at next week. We haven't finalized it yet, but it will be coming out soon. And we're really excited about that next step. Wanted to share with you today just sort of high level what that approach looks like. The North Star was one of the first things that we as a group really focused on, and that really kind of led us to be able to build the goals and actions. And so I'll just read that so I don't leave anything out. The North Star is pest management approaches in both agricultural and urban contexts in California that will promote human health and safety, ecosystem resilience, agricultural sustainability, community well-being, and economic vitality. And the group spent a lot of time thinking about the distinction between integrated pest management and sustainable pest management. Lots of people know what IPM is, but what do we really mean by sustainable pest management? And we really wanted to incorporate social justice, environmental justice, as well as really looking at whole ecosystems, looking holistically, and also just to recognize that none of this is going to work if it's not economically viable. And so this is really ambitious, but that's the approach that we're looking to take. So the implementation of these approaches will help steward the state's natural and cultural resources enabling healthy lives for all and an abundant, healthy food supply for future generations. So that's our goal, our North Star, and what we're driving toward. And so then the group set out to identify what actions do we need to take to get there. And one of the big ones is sort of what we're talking about in terms of alternatives and developing alternatives, but really recognizing that alternatives aren't just different chemistries or different tools. It's also cultural practices, also technology. And so I really want to think very broadly about how we're thinking about alternatives. And then thinking about, we want alternatives, but how do we get there? So part of it is also really focusing on building knowledge, and that is with research and to develop these tools, but also to share knowledge about how to practice sustainable pest management. Another thing is looking at pest prevention. If we prevent pests from showing up, then we don't have to use chemicals to deal with them. Another piece is looking at what we at the state can do. Getting to sustainable pest management isn't anything that DPR can solve. This is obviously something that we all have to work together to do, but we're not the only state agency that is a part of this. The Food and Ag Department plays a big role. Our sister agencies at Cal EPA also play a role. There's a lot of funding going to address climate change, a lot of funding going to really ensure that we're preserving our natural resources. And so there's a lot of work that we can be doing together at the state level to make sure that we're coordinated and really leveraging all the resources that are available to all of our sister agencies, both at the state level and the local level, to really be able to accelerate this transition. Another piece that really directly affects us at DPR is how we register and evaluate pesticides. One of the things that came up a lot from a grower perspective is, if we need safer tools, how do we get them through the pipeline and registered so that they can be used more quickly? And so we at DPR are going to be looking at how do we make our process more efficient while maintaining the scientific rigor that's necessary to ensure that we're protecting public health and the environment. We also have to look at how we're evaluating pesticides that are currently registered and that are more toxic. And like chlorpyrifos, it's a long process to look at those chemistries. And so what we really want to do is make sure that we are prioritizing those that are most risky, and also looking at our process so that we can try to move through that evaluation more quickly. And then finally, an action to monitor the environment for where pesticides are present in the environment, and also data collection. And I want to pause on this to say that in addition to the group that was focused on agricultural pest management, we also had a subgroup that was focused on urban pest management, which is often overlooked, and so we wanted to make sure that we have a focus on that environment as well as we think about climate change and water, drought, and that as a precious resource that could potentially be contaminated by or is contaminated by pesticide use. How do we make sure that we're thinking about urban uses as well? And so those are kind of the big actions that you'll be seeing in the roadmap. A big piece that we're going to be focused on is funding. Obviously, this can't happen without resources. We're also facing a really challenging budget environment, as I'm sure you all know. And so a big part of what we're going to be doing at DPR is looking at how are we prioritizing actions in the roadmap, and something that we're going to want to continue to consult with the work group on, but also it's something that we're going to need to be focused on. And when we put the roadmap out, there will be a public comment period, and so I encourage all of you to take a look at it. A lot of that is going to be, and the main focus is going to be, how do we prioritize actions and how do we think about implementation, which, as Margaret said, that is the real work that's ahead of us. And I want to just close by saying that we have to do it all together, and it really is the value of this work group, which was bringing people from multiple different perspectives together to work together to chart a course for the future. So I'm very excited to be here with my fellow work group members and talk more about that today with you.
Oh, thank you. So can see why we're really impressed with Julie and her leadership in DPR. That we appreciate her being there and fostering the some transition in the agency. So we're coming from a lot of different backgrounds, and so I thought we'd go around and share some of our experiences and some of our thoughts, like what are our experience in the group process, what are our personal roles in making the roadmap a living process.
My turn?
All right, Margaret.
All right, thank you again, everybody, for coming. So thank you, Julie, both for your comments, it was so succinct and really laid it out well, and for your participation in the group. And I can't say this enough, and I don't usually praise the department heads, those departments with whom we battle throughout the year. Julie has been phenomenal. She really opened herself up, extra time, making sure that the voice of the people who are most impacted was heard, and just did a really, really good job with that. So I want to thank you for that. Yeah, a couple things I wanted to talk about. So as necessary, the group did have to kick the can down the road a bit in determining exactly which those priority pesticides are, because it's going to be a long process, and again, a multi-stakeholder one, but I will say that we did manage to get included in that description the terms about highly hazardous pesticides, and that will be considered. So that means those pesticides that are carcinogenic, reproductive or developmental toxicants, groundwater contaminants, etc. So I was very happy that that will be included in the consideration of what are the priority pesticides to be focusing on. And we know that it's going to take a while for those determinations to happen, but DPR is committed to that process. Another point that I want to make is that, and Julie said this again, is that decisions be science-based, but here, better than anywhere else, we've heard that that science is both what comes out of the laboratory in terms of, in this case, toxicity of pesticides, but also the knowledge, understanding, the wisdom of the farmers in the field, and the place-based knowledge. And there was a lot of emphasis on that also as important sources of knowledge and understanding, and I would say science, empirical science, as opposed to sometimes we think about sort of reductionist experimental science. So I think that was an important point that at least many of the work group participants accepted and support. Julie also mentioned prevention, and so I don't have to say too much about that, but I do want to make the point that there is sort of one school of thought that prevention seems to be mostly focused on detection and exclusion of invasive species, but there is also quite a bit of attention to the idea of manipulating the ecosystem so that the conditions are no longer conducive to pests. And that, of course, is nothing new here at EcoFarm, but it's an important point that we're going to have to keep in mind as we move forward about what pest prevention activities mean. And that's at a very, very high level. Also, something we've heard a lot about here is soil health. And as Jenny mentioned, we did have a learning journey, one stop of which was at Driscoll's, and farmer Scott Peters, what's his last name? Scott
Parks.
No, Parks.
Parks, that I had a little brain fart there. Scott Parks. And he, of course, emphasized the importance of soil health, and that came loud and clear to the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group. The importance of soil health as imparting crop health and vigor and resistance to pests. But we're going to have to keep that one in mind as well as we move forward. So I was delighted that that came front and center into our discussion. And another very important result was a lot of discussion and unanimous agreement that the role of pest control advisors and crop control advisors need to incorporate that understanding of soil health and ecosystem health, and that recognition means that their expertise that is relied upon out in the field must include a working knowledge of soil health and ecosystem health. And I think that was really, really important, because we know that often those practitioners in the field upon whom growers decide for decisions about pest management sometimes don't have the background that we know is necessary. So understanding that the expansion of their working knowledge to include soil health and ecosystem health is vital, and I'm really, really glad that was part of the work group as well. And the final point, and this might seem sort of as an aside, but it was important to me, is that there was argument for part of the evaluation ultimately, because of course you have a plan, you have to implement it, then you have to evaluate. Did we make the progress we wanted to make? And there was discussion about evaluation, including the reduction in human health impacts. So do we see a reduction in acute poisonings or chronic poisonings? And I made the case that that is not a good indicator, because even though California has one of the most comprehensive pesticide illness reporting systems, and it's absolutely true, nevertheless, many or perhaps most acute poisonings never get reported for myriad reasons for why people, farm workers and other people in pesticide impacted communities can't and don't report. So that was really important that we don't have an indicator that is impossible to measure. And of course, chronic diseases don't get measured in any comprehensive way. So if we don't have a baseline, there's nothing to measure against. So even though that perhaps seems irrelevant, that was really important for me to get that in there.
Yay.
And we did. So I want to thank you, team members and the work group for that. And I will pass the baton. Who's next?
Yay.
Sure. Again, really happy to be here. Happy to have served on the committee, and also want to say, actually, many years ago, I used to work at DPR, and it has been really exciting to have Julie as the director there. I was back in the bunch of years ago, but I think she really has provided real leadership with this committee and this process. And it was a challenge. It was people with very different thoughts about farming, about agriculture, and I learned a lot of things and was surprised by certain attitudes and resistance, to be honest. And so when this opportunity to speak, especially at EcoFarm, and speaking as a plant scientist, a plant pathologist, but also somebody who has worked for a bunch of years now with Driscoll's here on the Central Coast, wanted to take part. Where to start? I agree the prevention was a really exciting piece of what we came up with, and it's something that is hugely important for anybody who grows berries. Host resistance is something that is really important. There's a lot of soil-borne fungi that attack strawberries in particular, so investing in resistance and understanding the importance of prevention. It's hugely important for organic growers. Driscoll's is about 30% of our business is organic, and in some parts of the U.S. or in Baja California, it's 100% organic. There were stories about our CEO many years ago wanting to take the whole company organic, but that was resisted. But we're farther along than a lot of other companies, and we also have made a commitment to organic planting stock, which is not a simple thing. And again, as a pathologist, I know what can go wrong with that. So, but being on this committee was just really revitalizing for me to see meet people like Scott Park. Soil health is really a very important area. We know, and we just came from the soil health session. Maybe some of you were there. Peter Henry talked about rotation with broccoli. There are these amazing knowledge, agroecological knowledge about interactions of different crop species and the microbes, either good microbes or bad. And we really need to have more research. That was a big part of the recommendations, was to have more knowledge generated that can be, and again, as Margaret said, not only science, land grant or academic research, but grower experiential knowledge that can really deliver. And again, hearing Scott recently talk was just very refreshing, because he really, the proof is in your farm and what you see and what happens there. So again, Driscoll's growers are independent growers, and then we do have the ability to ship and market, and so our commitment to organic means that we can, we deliver the Costco organic berries, and that can significantly reduce pesticide use. There's no question about it. So we are big, but we have a big commitment to some of the right kind of growing that this group talked about, and was really fun to hear. Biorationals, we'll hear from Pam, and there's no question some of those play a key role in, again, preventative, stimulating natural plant resistance in our nursery settings where we're growing our plants, and adding some trichoderma or something that will help them resist a little better the phytophthora that come along. We've also, as a company, looked a lot into what I call sort of machine alternatives to chemicals, and I think those are really important. Steam pasteurization, when you do have a pathogen, when your rotations and your choice of crops and your host resistance breaks down and doesn't work in a field, we need tools and that are less toxic. So we've done work with UC Davis on soil steam pasteurization. So it's not sterilization, but it knocks out some of the pathogens, and the microbial community recolonizes and makes that soil more suppressive. And we've done things with like a plant sauna. So believe it or not, plants like saunas too. For some reason, it's some Norwegian companies that have invented these things, and they are really impressive. So I think I'll stop with that, but I do want to say I've also really the makeup of the committee. When we visited the Driscoll's farm, we also visited important centers for farm worker health, and it was really a meaningful time. And Phil Foster, his farming operation, he's often here. I don't think he's here in the audience, but has done some innovative no-till work with berries, which is not easy. So none of these sort of new whole farming systems are going to be easy, but I think this ambitious agenda that the roadmap has laid out for reaching targets of deployment and adoption of sustainable pest management are really going to make a difference in the state. So really happy to have been a part of it.
I echo everything that's been said so far, and thank you to Julie for embarking on this, and along with CDFA, and to our fellow work group members. And I'm excited by a number of things. It was a very different experience on this one versus the chlorpyrifos one. Oh my God, it was quite less contentious. And the nice thing about this one was that we all agreed we have to move to be more systems-based, holistic systems, and move away from the reductionist way we practice pest management. And nobody argued with that. And so that means, how do you get there? It's not easy. There's a lot of, and we've heard some of the remarks here. And soil health is, you hear it from every really good grower, organic growers here. And improving your soil means every grower I talk to who improves their soil health, they have fewer pests. So then they use fewer materials, whether it's chemical or biological. And so incorporating that holistic agroecological information into how we train people who advise growers and write pesticide recommendations, and from the cooperative extension, we had a number of recommendations on that front of how we retool the training and education of those who advise farmers, because to move from this more reductionist way into a more holistic agroecological way of thinking, and that's really exciting to me. And on the biologicals front, everyone recognized that there's a huge gap, as one who developed biologicals my whole life, I had recognized that as well, because every survey I see from growers is like half say, I don't know how to use these things, and I need a lot more training, awareness, training, education of how to use these materials, and how to incorporate them into integrated programs, and how to incorporate them and use them based on the unique modes of actions that are very different from how you would use chemicals. And so we had a number of recommendations on how to accelerate the alternatives. It's not just biologicals, as we heard, but cultural practices, host plant resistance, also tech. There's a company I'm advising that does real-time PCR, so that means real-time spore detection of fungal pathogens in the field. So you know exactly, instead of relying on degree day models, which are okay, but they're not as accurate as when the spore is out there, you detect it, and then you can tell the farmer to spray or not, and that's led to a dramatic reduction in sprays in her early adopter customers from in wine grapes and also leafy greens. So again, a more holistic way of incorporating all the tools into practicing sustainable pest management. But where are the systems integrators? We're trained as, I'm an entomologist, there's a plant pathologist, there's a weed scientist. So we very often don't train, although there's more institutes and centers popping up, for how to be a systems integrator. And this is really key, that the training that goes forward in the academy as well as our PCAs and CCAs has to change in how we do that in order to be able to realize the sustainable pest management. I'm working with the Western Growers Center for Innovation and Technology to help growers vet biologicals more rapidly, because what their big complaint is, DPR makes an action where they reduce, or reduce chemicals or restrict chemicals or eliminate a chemical, and then what are the alternatives? And it might take years for UC or other other academics to do this process of vetting these things. And so how can we vet them more quickly on farm? Driscoll's is one of our early adopters for this program. And we put out an RFP, and we got 25 companies from all over the world with all these amazing new products, some I haven't even heard of, from every kind of conceivable technology you could imagine. New fungi, new bacteria, new plant extracts, peptides, what have you, and smart trapping systems, whatever. And it's just struck a need that incorporating growers into this process, who have the most knowledge and the best knowledge of really helping develop these sustainable programs, is really important. So with that.
Very good. Back in 1978, Robert van den Bosch came out with his book, The Pesticide Conspiracy. And so it was due to make a big splash, but all the books were recalled. Had a chat with Amigo Bob, a couple months before he passed on, and he said it put a chill in the entomologists at UC Berkeley. And so in the book, Van den Bosch talks about how the university and extension function as marketing arms of the pesticide industry. I'd like to say that it's a much better now, but we're getting better. And so I really feel blessed that our Insectary is represented on this panel to say very strongly that we don't need any toxic pesticides to produce our food, fiber, or medicine. That what do we need to grow a plant? Huh?
Soil.
Soil, sunshine,
Water.
water.
Love.
Another couple more. Huh?
Healthy soil. Nutrients.
No, you don't need it.
Oh, bugs.
Yeah,
Microbes.
Air.
Air.
So most of the mass of a plant is made of carbon, and that carbon comes from carbon dioxide in the air. And so we need just 5 things, the soil, a pinch of minerals from the soil, a little water, air, sunshine, and a seed or a cutting. And so when you go to a garden store or a farm store, there may be 20,000 SKUs there. And how many do you really need to grow a plant? Probably none of that stuff. And so we have been looking at regenerative agriculture. That what we've been coming out of is conventional chemical control, a chemical input-based agriculture. And we've been moving into a biology input agriculture, the organic agriculture, where we use organic products. We use compost. We use seaweed and fish emulsion and things like that for nutrients and so on. But if we go to the next step and build up the diversity in our ecosystem, then we can harvest the primary elements of soil, water, air, sunshine, and grow our food like that. And so we're in this transition, in this range of chemical input agriculture to biological input agriculture to regenerative agriculture. And so we have tremendous opportunity here to focus on the various aspects of transition to an agriculture that has a light footprint on our earth. And so it's a very exciting time. And right now it seems that there's all these ideas and forces and energy kind of swirling around in the air and ready for us to pull them down and to effect some really significant change here. And so this roadmap lays out all these different aspects. So like, if you want to support organic farmers, how about buying organic food? So we have a wonderful array of things. We can't get into too much detail, but we can kind of speak broad brushstroke about some of these things. So about 2 years of our life went into this process, and it has the chance of, like most government reports, getting set on the shelf and collect dust. But what we need to do is that, as the activist community, as the farming community, is to look at this and say, yes, this is good, and talk to our elected representatives. Say, okay, here's your marching orders, guys. We want this and this and this, and in our town here, we want no more pesticides used on our parks and our walkways, our hiking paths, and so on. We want all of our schools managed with organic product. There's all kinds of things that we could do in our neighborhood to support the statewide effort. So, time to get to work, guys. So,
Ron, can I pick up on
sure, yeah, please.
one point on that? And yes, would encourage you all to let your representatives know how important sustainable pest management is and how important it is to fund it. Part of the advantage, apart from absolutely having to look at urban pest management as part of this effort, one of the benefits is to make this relevant to a much broader spectrum of our elected officials in Sacramento. I was in a meeting with a representative from an urban district and was talking about this work, and he said, "Oh well, it doesn't really affect me." And so I think it's just people don't think about pesticides being used in urban environments, and so I think part of what my job and my colleagues' job is in meeting with legislators in this coming year once the roadmap is out, is talking about how critical it is in both agricultural and urban environments, as well as in our wildland settings. And it's also kind of what we're going to be focused on in working with local governments and really trying to, I think, Ron, what you're getting at is like, what's the coalition of the willing? Who are all of you who are really excited about this work, and how do we come together and work together to make this happen? So that's definitely going to be a focus for us in the coming year as the roadmap rolls out.
The urban subgroup did a lot of work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of recommendations in there. I really kudos to them. They really did a good job. Yeah.
And about 50% of the pesticides used in the state are used in urban settings. So it's very, very important, and it's a big environmental justice issue. If you think about pest control in low-income housing, for example.
And stormwater runoff, yes.
So it's an enormous issue that can really unite the entire state.
You said 50% of pesticides in general are used in urban settings.
Of reported pesticides, it's on that order.
Yeah, it's, some of it is, people don't think like chemicals in pools or, roadways.
Antimicrobials,
Well,
yeah.
what you put on your dogs for
Yeah,
fleas
fleas.
Right.
runs off.
Yeah.
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 Another question?
I just wonder, when is the roadmap going to be published?
So we're very soon.
Okay.
Yeah, we're finalizing details. Yeah, but very soon.
Thank you, first of all. It makes my heart sing. Hear you all, what you've done. This is, the thing I'm sitting here wondering is if there might be a way to connect this to what the COP15 in Toronto just discussed, which they had a like number 7. And what this was, the biodiversity scientists, when we say biodiversity, we really mean life on Earth. They say there is no way, this is at the UN conference, no way to preserve life on Earth unless we reduce the use of pesticides by 70% by the year 2030. That's the UN. Okay, so now what they passed, I think the pharmaceuticals got to them. They passed 50% reduction in risk by 2035, undefined. Risk is undefined. That's a problem. But it's in the final adopted. And I just wonder if, when somebody says to you, gee, that's not in my interest. Well, biodiversity is going to die on planet Earth if we don't stop using toxics. And all the top scientists were in Toronto, and this was like plank number 7. And I just think maybe the governor could use this as a talking point. That California is going to show a path to what has to be done.
It's a great point, and one of the things I wanted to pick up on what Margaret was talking about, this process that's outlined in the roadmap, and it gets to your point about risk, and it is like how you define it is very very tricky. And so I thought really a brilliant solution that Margaret helped craft with some fellow members is a prioritization process that really helps us really focus on the ones that are of the greatest risk, but not just focus on those that are the greatest risks that we have to phase out, but also at the same time raising that flag so that we're allocating resources to identify what the alternatives are. So it is that kind of more holistic, system-wide approach.
I'll mention also that there are NGOs that are helping, that are paying farmers to change their practices to improve biodiversity on the farm. And it's very small now, as well as reduction of carbon, greenhouse gas emission. And so that is the future, that farmers will have an incentive to not just soil health, which is a big deal, but all the rest of it, including biodiversity. So that's where we're heading.
You had a question here?
Well, I was just going to say, it helps to have poster children farms that you can put out there so that
Yes.
people can see
Yes.
the wins.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a question for, maybe mostly for Julie. There are a number of us in the organic community, I'm an organic farmer, that are a little bit alarmed that, perhaps the whole pesticide industry is shifting toward genetically engineered, insects as a pest control issue, et cetera. And I know California's, I'm not sure where it stands, but we were hearing that there was some acceptance of mosquitoes, GE mosquitoes being let loose in the state, and the implications to environment is, to me, very concerning, and especially when it comes to organic farmers, and are we going to get GE insects coming into our fields, and how do we deal with that? And it's almost like some of us that have been around a few years sort of watched the whole genetically engineered plant thing come in as sort of, with all these promises of how it was going to, we're going to have huge yields and we wouldn't have to use pesticides anymore and it was going to solve all these problems. And, now we see it actually created more problems than it solved. And so there's a lot of concern about these, the release of insects. So, and I haven't heard, like, when I've tried to kind of understand some of the science around it, all I hear is, well, the company did this science and governmental organizations are accepting that. And so it doesn't seem like there's any critical review of these things going on. So it's very concerning. And I was wondering if you had any, were addressing that.
Well, it's a really great question. I think they're complicated issues, right? Because if we're trying to move away from toxic chemicals, what are we moving to? And I think that there's a whole range of options that we consider, including organic practices and agroecological practices. There is a current application pending with our department for genetically modified mosquitoes as a sterile insect technology. Just to assure you that we are in the process of conducting a very rigorous review process. Initially, it was reviewed by US EPA. They approved, it's a research authorization. So it's just to digress for a second, in California, an application has to demonstrate that the pesticide is safe and works under California conditions. And so there are often research applications to demonstrate the effectiveness and safety of pesticides in California. Long-winded way of saying that we are undergoing a very rigorous scientific application review of this technology that will go through the CEQA process. We're not through it yet, so we're not just accepting what the science is that is offered.
Right. I think my concern is that our structure is so based on the regulation of chemicals that it's sort of like it doesn't really work when you're talking about a living creature that.
No, it does include it.
Yeah.
I'll make a comment on this because I know all the companies that are doing this. So the Almond Board and other commodity groups have actually thrown their weight behind sterile insect technology because you can reduce chemicals. And so how do you make sterile insects? You can irradiate them, or you can use gene editing, okay, or GMO, okay. So there's a degree of going from irradiation, which is less controversial than gene editing versus GMO. So there's companies that are gene editing spotted wing Drosophila, which we'd love to get rid of, help reduce that invasive.
Right.
And so the key then is the regulatory bodies are set up to look and see, is that going to be a risk to, you already have the flies out there, or if you're introducing a gene edited spotted wing Drosophila, and there's UC San Diego has licensed some technology in this as well as NC State back east. And is that going to be risky, relative to other things and the fact that the flies are already out there. So this is going on, and there's another company from UK that is working on codling moth. So the technology is such that it's possible to do some kind of sterile insect to most insects now. And so you're going to see this.
Isn't that true with the mosquitoes that in early trials, some of them didn't get sterilized and actually caused problems. So to me, it's
mosquitoes is quite a different
unanticipated problems that really worry me.
Absolutely,
And I don't know if we're
absolutely.
prepared as a culture for
No question. And the regulatory framework has to deal with that.
But do we have a regulatory framework that's sufficient to deal with it? Because the companies do this under patent. And so I don't know that we actually have a competitive ability to review what companies do.
Well, I think maybe I'll
In this arena.
I just want to say that that afterwards I could put you in touch with the folks who are heading a campaign against the release of those mosquitoes and includes a letter by scientists opposing that release. So I'm happy to connect you with that. And yes, the regulatory process is what it is, and the power of the community to speak up and put pressure on those processes So we can't just defer. Go ahead, Julie.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think, you know, this issue of confidential business information is one that we take very seriously, and in fact, some of the organizations that raise concerns about this application included a flag on what is being redacted as part of this application, and we went through a very, very rigorous process to evaluate what was redacted, what was appropriate, and so again, just want to, I guess, assure you to the extent I can that at our department we're taking this review very seriously, as well as ensuring that information that should be public, particularly information about human health or environmental impacts of this kind of release, is public and not designated as confidential and not released.
Yeah. So the issue with the mosquitoes brings up IPM, that there's a whole range of things that are range of practices that are used in public health departments to reduce the mosquitoes through managing water and potential bacterial larval sites in water, stuff like that. So there's lots of different approaches, so that we need to get away from just here's a bug, see the bug, kill the bug approaches.
The problem with that model is that sometimes it's the biotech companies that or used to be the pesticide companies that are now the biotech companies that have the huge marketing budgets to, and cleaning out the water in your backyard.
She's jealous.
Too little. I'm jealous of those marketing
Cleaning out the
budgets.
water in your backyard, there's no money in that, right? So that's the dilemma we've created as a society a lot of times, I think. So we
Well,
go with,
it's not just, but there's, I hear still growers telling me they want silver bullets. It's much easier than sustainable pest management, right? Now you're different because you're here, but the majority want a substitution for the next silver bullet coming along. We have to change that mentality, but that's still pretty prevalent.
Let's get a question in the back there.
Yeah, I also came here because I had concerns about this genetically engineered mosquito. I'm actually from the for-profit industry. I'm a marketer of emerging natural and organic food brands. I'm a mother. I have an organic garden, and this concept of a genetically engineered mosquito is very scary to me personally. Could you explain in layman's terms what is the benefit of this mosquito, and if it is approved and it's out there in the wild, you mentioned the risks. Could you explain what the risks are specific to this mosquito that is potentially going to be released, and what would you be able to do about it once it's out there? Are there any measures in place that you could control? Like, to me, this is like, as a lay person, this feels like Jurassic Park stuff. So, could you explain exactly what the risks are, what the benefits are, and how would you control the risk?
So I'll start by saying, so this is currently under review. So just to let you know, this process is underway. My understanding of this mosquito, and I'm a lawyer by training, I'm not a scientist, so I apologize if my overview is very superficial. But this particular mosquito, and please panel members jump in, it carries dangerous diseases in certain parts of the world. They are not yet in California. And so the technology, as Pam said, would edit a gene so that when the mosquito mates, the female mosquitoes die off. The problem, as I understand it, with current pest management controls for this mosquito are that it breeds in very small quantities of water, and so typical sprays of chemicals are ineffective against this mosquito. That is how the technology is explained by those that have developed it.
So Julie also made the point that it's not even yet it's not addressing a problem that even exists. And the other thing is that it's engineered, and I don't know exactly this, but to be tetracycline
It's
is
edited. It's
it's
not
edited.
engineered, it's edited.
It's
There's a big
edited.
difference.
It's edited
Big
so
difference,
that it is inactive or activated in the presence of tetracycline. That's what I can't remember.
No,
That's,
that's a
uh,
GMO.
But that's what the oxytocin is.
So I think Margaret is making a very good point that there is and I don't remember the scientific kind of implication of the tetracycline, but part of what we as a department are looking at is to the extent that, evaluating that risk, because that is a risk, like, and again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know exactly what that interaction is, but it's definitely part of our review.
So I'm not sure why they want it to be in California, because right now, there's trials that have gone on, well, last year went on in Africa, and it was seriously hoping to help with malaria, which is still a very serious disease that kills millions of people a year. So that was the target, and the pilot was successful, but I'm not sure what they're targeting in California at the moment. I mean, maybe it's preventative in case temperatures rise and we have some of these, well, we do have some of these, yellow fever mosquito was spotted in our region, so yeah.
And basically, Jurassic Park, nature will find a way. So,
But it is
so
true too that this is the first insect of an industry that's about to, just.
No, actually, there's another one. In Cornell, they did a trial of a modified diamondback moth.
No, what I'm saying is that there's an industry that's going to bring us
Oh, yeah.
hundreds
Tons
and
of-
hundreds
tons
of
of-
genetically
yeah, exactly.
engineered insects. Am I correct?
Yeah, but I
This
think
is-
it's important to distinguish between genetic engineering and gene modification. Gene editing, sorry. Gene editing modifies the insect itself. Genetic engineering puts a foreign gene into the particular host, okay? They're very different risks, and you have to look at them that way. So I want to make sure we're very clear on our science on the front.
Well, gene editing is a form of genetically modification, so I think you're.
Well, genetic modification is a big term, okay, but
Yeah.
genetic engineering is very different from gene editing. Okay, so it's just important to know.
And let's get another
Just to,
question here.
this is a great question, but I want to move to a slightly different question. I actually have two questions, if you don't mind. The first question is, Margaret, you talked about the risk prioritization process,
Yeah.
and you mentioned several parameters that are going to be looked at. One thing you didn't mention, and I work for the Xerces Society, I'm a pesticide specialist with the Xerces Society, we're all about protecting the little things that run the world that are like 70% of biodiversity.
That's included in there as well.
Okay, that was my question. So
Every
you
meeting.
specifically call out insect biodiversity or invertebrate. Okay, that is a
Yes.
parameter. Okay.
Every meeting, so it started off,
Okay.
get most toxic to mammals, and then
Yeah.
every meeting, some of us would say, well, wait a minute.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just about toxicity in mammals, it's about two not targets.
Okay.
That's
great.
very
I'm
much
glad to
included.
hear that.
Yes, yes.
And this second question, I almost don't want to ask it because I'm sure it's going to come across as really cynical, and I think that this is like the least cynical group I've ever seen present. And I'm like, wow, this, does sound really great. And yet I'm really familiar with EPA's risk assessment process. I'm really familiar with the registration process and kind of how it works. And I've seen so many risk assessments that basically show we've got huge risk with certain active ingredients, but they go forward and they get registered anyway with very minimal mitigation on the label.
You have every reason to have that concern.
Yes.
And so two
So,
things. Yeah.
well, here's
Yeah.
so it's partly that, but I'm also wondering because here you are at EcoFarm, and a few of you have been doing work in the environmental field for many, many years, and others are biologists essentially. And would this sound differently if you were at the almond board meeting right now? If Syngenta or CropLife was on the panel today, how would this sound differently? Because I'm assuming that they were on your panel.
Yeah, we
So-
did.
So are we just hearing what we want, what you think we want to hear? I know it sounds cynical, but I want to know.
Earlier in January, saying essentially the same thing.
Okay.
With Gabrielle Ludwig was on the
On our
panel.
group.
Okay.
others on the panel who were doing integrated pest management research. So it's, understand, to your point, understand your cynicism and skepticism is healthy. And we need to be held accountable for what we're, and that's me as the government representative. But I think also, if, again, as I said, this can't be just done by DPR. I mean, this really requires everybody to be a part of this.
But I will say, speaking as one of the, a big ag member of this, I was somewhat surprised by how anti-organic some of the big guys were on that committee, or they didn't want. I kept trying to say, yep, let's have organic be a target, or let's try to increase organic in California.
We couldn't get that.
We couldn't get that. So it wasn't perfect, and it doesn't have everything that all of us wanted. But we're going to keep doing what we do. We're going to keep expanding organic in California and elsewhere. So I do think you're right. There was a diversity of voices. There were people more conservative than the group here that were on the committee, and they did impact what some of us wanted. I don't want to pretend that it wasn't. So I think your sincere question, I want to sincerely answer. I didn't get everything I wanted, but.
And that's why the going forward is so important. So there's two particular things. One is this yet to be defined process for determining the priority pesticides. And in that is very specifically highly hazardous, not just risk, because a carcinogen is always a carcinogen, whether you encapsulate it or make it little or put it somewhere else. Same with the other highly hazardous pesticides. And that going forward, this also must be a multi-stakeholder process. So that was one super important piece of it. In terms of organic, one thing that we identified and John was very actively engaged in this, is the power of procurement, and that if the people who practice sustainable pest management, IPM organic, are going to be incentivized in this process, then procurement is important. And on the yet to be developed, but with a preliminary list of what qualifies, organic is there. So we began with a list. The group couldn't agree on what the final list is, but we started with a process that the state will be required to continue to develop what are the criteria for procurement. And organic is definitely top and center in that list of what will constitute sustainable pest management practices.
When you say, you talk about the state's procurement system?
Well, because we're talking about the state,
Yeah.
and what the state can do.
Okay.
So the state has procurement power in purchasing food for schools, for institutions, for state agencies. They only have so much power.
Yeah.
Then there's public power and whatever else, but there's a little window in which the state has procurement power.
Okay.
So what can we do to influence those monies? And I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about that piece of it. There's also another question.
There's a question.
Thanks.
My question's for Ron. I'm here because you're here. And I like that you brought up Van den Bosch and Amigo. I also talked to Amigo about him, and he believes that the pesticide mafia murdered him, and I believe that too. So you're optimistic about anything here, and I'm questioning your optimism and wondering where it stems from, because the pesticide industry controls through the lobbying all of these different channels and controls everything to the very end, which is why there's only been one pesticide reduced or banned in California in forever. So why are you optimistic about this work? What do you see? Because if we don't get rid of the lobbying power of the industry, we're never going to get anything done.
Good points. Yeah, as Will Rogers, a cowboy comedian, said, "We've got the best government that money can buy." And so, what we need is more sunshine. We need more light on the process. And so, as we join together in celebrating, this path forward to get off the really toxic pesticides, we can work on engaging our neighbors. There's in Transition Town, there was this novel idea about how to make change. Talk to your neighbors. that you talk to them, engage them, and have conversations. We need to have lots and lots of difficult conversations, as we did with the work group. Talking to Monsanto, Bayer, and the big commodity groups and so on. We had these conversations, and we worked through. I'm concerned about this. You're concerned about that. Where can we agree? And so it's the process that I have hope in. That as we engage, with our neighbors, and go to when we go home, we go to meetings, and we talk up this roadmap, and we talk about, okay, what is it do we want as a community? What do we want? What are our expectations for a healthy environment, in our neighborhood, our city, in our county, in our state?
So based on that, do you find, so Xerxes just did a couple studies on milkweed and found that 100% of the samples were toxic to butterflies.
Not exactly. They all contain pesticides.
They all contain pesticides.
Yeah.
Like 100% of all samples. So this is like, you're trying to plant for pollinators, you're trying to do some good, and then you're killing whatever you're trying to attract. So how do we get those kind of messages front and center when we're talking to or dancing with a group that just wants more and more and more? They're rapacious, they don't want to stop. So how do you get to there?
Economic incentives.
Pardon?
Economic incentives.
So people will
Is one way.
spend more for organic. They will.
Yeah.
Both
And-
when they're buying landscape material
And you
also-
want a farmer to do something, pay him. It's like, duh.
There needs to be incentives for farmers to transition, yes. So
Yeah.
how do we, like, we're all speaking to the group here, we're preaching to the choir here. How do we get that message to the general public that it's organic for everything is better? Especially when an industry is lobbying hard to say organic is dangerous or whatever they're saying.
Well, there's
Or
also a
hysterical.
worry that regenerative, there's an embracement of regenerative because it allows pesticides, and that organic will then just be over here. And so there's a lot of support from mainstream ag groups for regenerative because of that.
A great point.
So it's really important that regenerative organic momentum happen.
You know what? I sat in on a DPR meeting in Sacramento just after Trump was elected and was horrified at what I heard. A man, a DPR guy, there was the citrus industry and the almond industry and the committee members, and they were fist bumping that Trump was now in office, that they could, and one man said it, now we can use the chemicals that we haven't been able to use. I tried to get a recording, they wouldn't let me have it.
Well, I'll give you a statistic. Going through EPA, registers pesticides and biopesticides. There's like 1 to 2 new active ingredients, chemicals going through EPA each year, and there's about 30 to 40 new biologicals. Okay, there's not enough staff at EPA to handle all those new biologicals, but so the pipelines of the large companies are very thin. So they are moving into more precision technology, data, and biologicals for that reason. And one of the big companies on our committees told me that their company, because of what you exactly said, so neonics, they get registered, down the line, 20, 30 years later, you find out all these effects. Well, they're saying that they're not going to take that risk anymore, that can happen. That's very bad for their shareholders. So what are they incorporating sooner in their toxicological assessments of their new chemicals to make sure that doesn't happen? Now you could say that sounds nice and wait to see it happen, but at least there's recognition that this has to happen.
Is there any hope of turning to the precautionary principle in the United States? That's the the cautious
No.
that drives our system to which is why there's so much money.
Good luck.
So that's not going to happen.
I don't see that.
Yeah, there's a question here and then back there.
Yeah, given that the potential phase-out of chemicals would lean pretty heavily on alternatives, was there discussion in the working group for funding mechanisms? To conservation organizations, biocontrol programs,
Yes.
to develop and implement those alternatives?
Yes. money's a big thing in it because we recognize that you need money to do all this. We want to rebuild UC IPM and UC Cooperative Extension, which has been gutted over the years. But we actually we kept it in the report, I think, which was creating a big foundation, and raising money from other foundations and wealthy people to, just like the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, which is a line item in the Farm Bill by Congress, is to fund cutting edge research. Could we do a FAR-like foundation that could fund some of this? Well, we had a lot of bold ideas. Now, how do we do it? Right, right, Julie?
That's right.
How do we fund it? Yeah, but we did talk about that. Yeah.
There's a question back there.
Where do you see pheromone-based insect traps and lures playing into pest management as an opposite to the toxic pesticides?
Oh, pheromones is a very important tool. Big commodity groups like the Almond Board have initiatives in pheromones. It's a very, very important component of IPM. Yeah.
What companies are you seeing that are doing a good job with that?
Oh, there's a ton of them. So there's a lot of new ones. I didn't realize there was going to be so much innovation in IPM. You have your stalwarts of Pacific Biocontrol and Suterra, your established companies, which are great companies, and then there's all these companies coming in with cheaper ways less expensive ways to make pheromones, including fermenting them. So FMC, a big chemical company, just bought BioPhero, which makes fermented pheromones. Then there's a company, M2I, in Europe that also is coming to the U.S. with their new pheromone technology. And let's see, who did I miss? I'm sure there's more. I can't remember all of them. But they all have a unique. Provivi. Provivi has a Nobel laureate who came up with a process for making pheromones less expensive. So there's an amazing amount of innovation going on in the pheromone arena right now, and they're a really great component mating disruption to be IPM to prevent. They're not perfect because in high years, but you pair that with precision technology like what Semios has done, and smart trapping, and have real-time trapping of when the insects are coming in, and then they can dial in the dose of the pheromone that's needed based on what they're seeing in their smart trap. So pretty exciting times on the pheromone front.
And pheromones are a very soft technology, and they can be combined with biological controls.
Oh, exactly.
For
Exactly.
pheromones, you have to have a certain block size,
Yeah.
and then you always have edges. And so on the edges, you can use the trichogramma moth egg parasite, to clean up the edges. So, they pair very nicely.
Very much so.
And you're putting out like milligrams of natural chemical per acre. So it's a very low impact on the beneficial insects and on the health of the farm workers.
Yeah.
Is there money to be made in that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's about $1 billion of venture capital money's gone into pheromones in the last 5 years.
Right here's a question.
I had a question that we may be moving away from pheromones, but if the conversation around pheromones wants to continue, that's great. So I was thinking, like, in this roadmap, what is the timeline for phasing out and then banning other pesticides? Because, like, I've heard there's only one pesticide that's ever been banned in California. Is that going to continue to happen, and what would the timeline be like for that?
Well, I would love to give the dates, but I think the one piece that we're trying to just hold off until the roadmap is released. But I will say that part of the process that we were talking about in terms of evaluating risk and is to have a process for how do we look at the risk and how do we get rid of it. And so that's not necessarily going to be the same for every pesticide or every use. And so I think part of this process was designed to, or that is anticipated to be designed in a way that really can look at the risk presented by each different pesticide or use of a pesticide. But Margaret, maybe you can add on to that.
No, that sounds good for now, because we'll see when the roadmap comes out about what numbers are in it in terms of timeline and.
We had reduction targets.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gonna say them.
Yeah. We can't say them.
Yeah.
Can't say them.
Well,
out as fast as possible.
We're trying to be realistic. Yeah.
There's a question over there.
So I have a question on then the urban side, because you mentioned that 50% is used on the urban side, and any of our neighbors can go into the big box store or our local hardware store and buy any, not any of the synthetics, but Roundup and, some of these other insecticide, fungicides just off the counter, and then go home and use them however they want. And so where has your roadmap addressed that? And then also, I guess, roll Caltrans into there and what is happening with Caltrans on the state level. But, just being able to walk into Home Depot and see this whole, section of pesticides with no, no information, no training, no, best use practices associated with those.
That was a big concern that we explored, and that was particularly covered in the urban, in both groups, in the urban and the agriculture-related groups, that as pest control advisors, we have all these regulations we need to follow when we recommend the use of a pesticide and when we use it and apply it, and very cautious about diluting it properly and all that. And there's no way of ensuring that the homeowner is going to comply with the regulations, let alone the directions, the limited directions that are on the label. So it's a big concern, and that may be addressed down the road with the DPR's process, looking at registering products for retail use in California.
So I think just to pick up on that, so products have to be registered. The challenge is California has a data reporting system that mostly captures agricultural uses of pesticide, as you sure know. On the non-ag use, there isn't reporting. So the data that we have is sales data, which is inexact. We just don't know. And so what you'll see in the roadmap are recommendations related to how do we better capture data around non-agricultural uses of pesticides. I think part of this prioritization process as well will be, thinking about what are those pesticide risks that are used in more urban contexts, and having more data around that, I think is going to be really helpful. The other piece, and just reflecting on the PCA session right before this, education is really important, and so recognize the challenge of, how do you get consumer attention when there's so much else going on, but definitely something that we recognize that we at DPR need to think about. How do we help better educate consumers about how they're using pesticides, and what are pesticides? I think people probably don't even think about, spraying Raid or, whatever. Roundup.
And bleach is a pesticide, so all kinds of disinfectants, anything that kills, microbes or insects is a pesticide. So a lot of things you use in the home, hydrogen peroxide, bleach, sanitizing hand wipes, all these things are technically pesticides. So as point of contact, there's the Master Gardener program, that tries to train gardeners, how to use pesticides responsibly and hopefully not use pesticides. And then
Depends on the state. Master Gardener program has been very wed to pesticides in many states.
Yeah.
What did you say, very what?
Wed to pesticides.
Yes.
From my experience. But not in California, but other states.
I've seen it in California.
I've seen it in
We've got a lot of
California.
education to do, and so look in the mirror. You can find somebody to engage to educate your neighbors, educate your community. Have meetings, where you talk about, how can we grow food in our yards, using compost that we do collectively on a
Work group member
neighborhood.
wants to say something.
Anecdotally, Gina, I would say that as we were finishing finishing up our work and starting to convey, have the conversations, which is a key tenet of what this is to communicate. Talking to Caltrans folks, it was amazing to see, oh, I didn't realize I had the opportunity to not do this. And so you can see that mental change occurring in that conversation and opportunity happening at, incrementally, small places, small wins, but eventually I think that's how we start to move the needle. And I'd say more broadly, what I've learned from this group is it's time to be courageous. It is time to take, the opportunity is here in front of us right now, and if we don't kind of put forth the effort to make the change, we're not going to get the change we're looking for.
And if I could just pick up, be braver, where would you put that out?
I would put that in essentially, saying, listening to Scott Park and taking the time to, for me, I'm a large scale organic producer of leafy greens. And so if I can move the needle towards more integrated pest management and more soil health practices and more reduction of inputs across my 45,000 acres crop acres that I grow here, then that's where I want to place my energy to move the needle. And I need to do that up the chain in my business, in my company, to have convincing conversations with the growers out in the field and have convincing conversations on the business side to say essentially, this is not an economic win necessarily right in front of you, which is where a lot of us operate, that we're going to have to take the time to see the benefit and let that pay out in other ways. And that convincing conversation is a tough one to have. And I think just taking the courage to keep having it and repeating it over and over and gathering the data in the background to support that, that's where I think we're at, and that's where the shift, I think, is possible. I hope I'm not too optimistic or ignorant about it, because we've been in this vein for 40 years in organics for a long time, but there's a lot of motion right now in climate change and a lot of things, a lot of opportunity I see to try and make that change.
What if Julie could,
Julie, did you
concluding remarks,
Well, I wanted
and
to,
her vision of how this is going to
You wanted
change
to-
California.
I'll do that, but I also wanted to tie together this Caltrans communication point, because and I'll just say, like, at the state agency level, it's really easy, as I'm sure you all can appreciate, you kind of get in your silo and you're doing your thing. And one of the things that really has been beneficial to me in my role coming out of as part of the work group is having conversations with sister agencies, and like Caltrans, who has thousands of miles of rights of way that they manage. And as we've started to have conversations with our sister agencies about pest management practices, there's great interest, and we're working with Caltrans now, and we never worked with Caltrans. So, and we think about the potential impact of that, and they're very excited, and they've got a really energetic person who's leading the way. So I think it's that power of conversation and just daylighting the importance of this work. That's really important.
So what's your vision for how this is going to change California?
So, where I sit.
Just a minute, we have a
Yeah,
plane.
okay.
Yeah. Hello, guys.
From where I sit, I think, just to echo some of my fellow work group members, I learned a tremendous amount from the work group, and I really can't imagine having done my job for the last 18 months without the work group. And so I see continuing to, engage with the work group and your wider networks, including all of you, to be a part of moving this work forward, because we alone can't do the work. We really need a collective effort that's really focused on working together. And I think, Ron, you or Pam and Jenny, I think we all kind of got to it that, we had difficult conversations and nobody got everything they wanted, but we were able to agree on a really ambitious path forward. And I think focusing on where we are aligned will help us move ahead.
Do you
It's
see
5
any
o'clock.
political
Thank you,
leaders?
Julie.